Do you like to dance? What sort of music do you like to dance to? Have you ever got so caught up in your dancing that you just wanted to go on and on and on without stopping? Hello everyone, I'm Kathleen Pelly. Welcome to Journey with Story. When I was a little girl growing up in Scotland, we all had to learn all kinds of Scottish dances that had names like the Dashing White Sergeant, Strip the Willow, or the Eightsome Reel. And to this day, I just love going to a ceilidh, which is a type of a party where people dance, and I love to dance the night away. Well, today's story is a tale from Africa, and it's about a poor farmer who ends up dancing to the music of an enchanted bird even when he doesn't want to, and it causes him a lot of problems. So he and his fellow villagers have to find a way to deal with this singing bird who makes people dance when they don't want to. But before we begin, I'd love to share a recent review. My name is Marianne, and you gave me a shout on the King Midas and the Golden Touch episode. This is my #1 podcast that I asked my mum to play. I am now 9 years old and I live in Texas, and I just want you to know I love your podcast. Well, thank you, Marianne. It makes me very happy to hear how much you enjoy this podcast, and thank you for taking the time to write that review. For any of our listeners, if you haven't already done so, we would love it if you could take a moment and write a review for us, as it really helps to grow our outreach. Now, let's take a journey with the singing bird and the dancing farmer. Not so very long ago, there lived a farmer whose name was Simon. He was a sensible, hard-working man. Every year at planting time, he cleared his land. He planted yams, maize, cassava, but mainly yams. He was determined that his family would never go hungry, and that he and his wife and their many children would always have enough to eat. One day, as he was getting ready to plant again, he told his wife, "I shall go to the farm today and take a cutlass to start clearing the land." He left the village and headed along a narrow path to the place where he would make his farm. "This is the perfect place to grow our next year's food supply," he said. "But first I will need to clear away the underbrush and all these bushes." Simon picked up his cutlass and set to work, but no sooner had he started than he heard the loud, shrill sound of a bird singing. So beautiful was the song that Simon was immediately drawn into its rhythmic spell. He flung down his cutlass and began to dance. Finally, when Simon was utterly spent and exhausted, the bird stopped singing. Simon picked up his cutlass, ready to work again, but once more the bird started to sing. And once more, Simon flung down his cutlass and began to dance. Over and over again this happened, with Simon being compelled to dance whenever the bird sang. After 7 attempts to start his work, Simon grew desperate. "This wicked bird," he cried. "How can I ever clear the land and do my planting?" He ran back to the village to find his elderly uncle, a wise man respected by all, and told him what had happened. "You're talking nonsense," said his uncle. But Simon insisted that the singing bird had interfered with his work, and something needed to be done, and so his uncle began to suspect that perhaps there was some truth to his story. "Very well," he said, "let us head back to your farm and I shall see if what you say is true." When they reached Simon's spot of land, Simon picked up his cutlass and started clearing away the bushes. At once, from high up in a mahogany tree, the bird began to sing. And once more Simon was forced to abandon his work and start swaying to and fro to the rhythm of the song. "Stop, stop!" cried his uncle. "Give me your cutlass." Then his uncle began to clear away the underbrush. But the bird started singing again, and this time the uncle found himself caught up in the song. Throwing down the cutlass, he started to dance and could only catch some rest when the bird stopped singing. "This is a serious problem," said the uncle. "We must go back to the village and inform the chief." They hurried back along the path past many other farms that had already been cleared and planted. When they reached the village, they went straight up to the chief's big house. He was sitting on a carved and decorated wooden chair outside on his veranda. "Oh, chief," said Simon, bowing low, "I have a terrible thing to report." "Oh, tell me, what is this terrible thing you speak of?" demanded the chief. "My family and I are going to starve to death because a singing bird is preventing me from preparing my farm for planting." "What foolish talk is this?" snapped the chief. After Simon had told the chief his whole story, the chief grew even angrier. "You are bothering me with something I cannot believe," he shouted. Then Simon's uncle, who was much respected because of his age and wisdom, stepped forward, asking permission to speak. "What my nephew says is true," he said. He explained how he himself had tried to work and how the singing bird had made him dance instead. "If you go to that farm, chief, then you too will end up dancing." For several minutes, the chief sat silently deep in thought. Then he stood up, saying, "We will go to that farm and solve this mystery." So the chief's chair carrier carrying the carved and decorated chair, Simon's uncle, and Simon himself all went out of the village and along the path to Simon's spot of land. The bird was still sitting high up in the mahogany tree. The chief sat down in his chair. "Start working," he ordered Simon. Simon took his cutlass and had hardly set to work when the bird started singing. Throwing down the cutlass, Simon began to dance and dance until he was exhausted. Next, the chief ordered Simon's uncle to start work. The uncle took up his cutlass and had hardly set to work before the bird began to sing. Throwing down his cutlass, the uncle began to dance. "I am a chief," the chief cried. "Birds cannot rule me." Jumping up from his chair, he seized the cutlass and began clearing away the bushes. Immediately, the bird began to sing. For several seconds, the chief resisted the urge to dance, but soon it was impossible, and he too threw down the cutlass and danced until the bird stopped singing. "We must return to the village at once," ordered the chief. Then he, his carrier with the chair, Simon's uncle, and Simon quickly returned to the chief's house in the village. "Call together all the people of the village," ordered the chief. When everyone was assembled, he told every man to fetch his cutlass and follow him back to Simon's farm. Once there, the chief ordered them all to start clearing away the underbrush. As soon as they picked up their cutlasses, the bird started to sing. The men threw down their cutlasses and began to dance. That night, back in the village, the chief and his people discussed the problem. There was no other land for Simon, and if he and his family were to have food, then they would have to start planting without further delay. "Call all the hunters," demanded the chief. When the hunters presented themselves, the chief spoke seriously to them. "Hunting is your job. Now we will see how well you can hunt." He instructed the hunters to go to Simon's farm and catch the singing bird. When they arrived at the farm, they aimed their guns and fired at the bird, but the bird flew rapidly from tree to tree and escaped their bullets. The hunters then shot arrows and threw spears at the bird, but again the bird flew rapidly from tree to tree and escaped harm. "Are we never to conquer this singing bird?" cried Simon in despair. Then one young hunter noticed that the bird was perched on a low bough of the tree. Some boys from the village began to throw stones. The bird started to fly to a higher bough, but the young hunter, who had now crept very close, jumped up and caught the bird by the feet. "I've caught it, I've caught it," he announced. I'm singing. The bird replied, fluttering its wings. But the magic had left the bird's voice, and it was taken to the chief's house. "From now on, we shall keep this bird in a cage," the chief declared. From that day forward, no one was prevented from doing his work, and Simon was able to return to his farm. He cleared away all the bushes and the underbrush. He planted his yams, his maize, and his cassava, happy to know that his family would have food for the coming year. The bird still sang its song from his cage, and the people still danced to the magic of his music, but only when they pleased. Well, what do you think about the chief's solution to this problem? Do you feel sorry for the bird being put in a cage? Or do you think that was the only way to solve the problem? Can you think of another way that the chief might have solved that problem? Cheerio then. Join me next time for Journey with Story. Music and post-production was by Colette Jonas.